experience in working towards getting our students more interested in reading. And today, I have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Troy Hicks back to the ERWC community. Dr. Hicks is a professor of English and Education at Central Michigan University, where he serves as chairperson of the Department of Teacher and Special Education. He also directs the Chippewa River Writing Project, which is a site of the National Writing Project, and collaborates with K through 12 colleagues to explore how they implement newer literacies in their classrooms. He has authored dozens of resources, including books, articles, chapters, blog posts, and other media broadly related to the teaching of literacy in our digital age, and it is an honor to have him here today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Troy Hicks.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I appreciate being able to be back with you this fall and hope that everyone's school year is off to a great start. So we'll get the slides and everything pulled up here on screen in just a moment. You should have a bit.ly short link in the chat that will take you to the shared Google slide deck. And if you would like to save a copy of that for yourself, you can feel free to go ahead and make that copy to save to your own Google Drive. So we'll get started here with my slides and sharing in just a moment. And we will be talking tonight, of course, about this idea of reading and thinking about what it is and what it means. And especially as we're infused with this world of AI, how we can do that better. Did I jump ahead too quickly? Did you have a few other notes that you had wanted to share?
Well, we are in it now, so please go ahead.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, no, don't worry about it.
Okay. I'll end early, I promise. I'll leave time at the end. I'm so sorry. All right. Well, again, welcome everyone. If it's possible for me to do screen sharing a little bit later in the presentation, that would be great because I would perhaps, if we have time, like to play a bit with some interactive prompting and seeing how we might be able to use that as a tool for reading with our AI companions. So again, welcome. I'm glad to be able to talk with you tonight about teaching adolescent readers in a digital world. And I have to certainly give a shout out to my friend and colleague and co-author, Kristen Hawley Turner. When we started doing this work on connected reading some number of years ago, we were interested in getting into classrooms and working with colleagues and to find out what that would mean for our students to be engaged with digital texts in a variety of ways. And I'm fortunate that we were able to do that. We were able to visit a number of classrooms and teach lessons and interact with adolescent readers in middle school and high school. And even though some of this data we'll be reporting on is a little bit older, we'll talk a little bit about where we're at now and how it fits into today's reading landscape. So if we can go ahead to the next slide, please. All right, so let's imagine that you have a moment. Perhaps you are standing in line somewhere. Of course, you're not waiting at a stoplight and looking at your phone. I mean, maybe 10 or 12 years ago when we started thinking about this, that was probably still legal in a lot of states, but you're looking at your device or you're thinking about things as you're wandering around. You have a few minutes to kill and you want to read something. And I know we'll talk a little bit about audiobooks and things like that here soon enough. But what would happen the moment you go here and you say, all right, I want to actually read something? Where do you go first? What do you do? Where do you go second? Do you go straight to an app? Do you go to a website? Do you go to your email? Do you go to your messages? Feel free to drop in the chat. When you think about engaging with one of your devices as a space for reading, what's the app? What's the website? What's the place that you go to first? So we're seeing Amazon, we're seeing Kindle, Hoopla, heading to email first, Audible, messages first, emails. a couple different types of websites. Maybe those are apps like TMZ, NPR, CNN. Some people start Smart News, AP, Libby. So, as we're thinking about all of these places that we are going and landing on just to begin this process of reading, it's pretty compelling to just pause for a moment and say, where do I go first? But where is it likely that my colleagues go first? And more importantly, where is it likely that my students would go first? And even as we're looking at this, it's interesting to think that I could get the same news that I can read in the Wall Street Journal app or the New York Times app, but I could also access that through a web browser. I could also access that as a link that someone had sent to me. I could access that in a variety of different ways. And so I think as we begin to talk and think about these levels of access and where students are accessing different reading materials, that will be important. Also, for all the folks that have put in things about like Libby and Overdrive and Hoopla and the library, thinking about just as great as that is that we have those on our devices, that level that it takes to get students into those, to get them signed in, to get them familiar with those devices, a single sign-on, an extra password, a push notification, those types of things. Where are the points that we feel friction when we're reading and engaging with materials online? And how is all of this similar or different, as obvious as it might seem to ask this question, to your print reading? So I'm just curious, when you think about that, and for some of you, I see, yep, someone just put it in the chat. Some of you enjoy just reaching right over and grabbing that real book off the shelf or off the end table. But what does that feel like? How is it similar to and different from what we might typically experience when we're going for a book? And you could perhaps even ask, is my default now to go to the screen or is it to go to print? So think about that for a minute. Feel free to add some more notes to the chat. And if we could advance to the next slide, please. All right. So one of the things that I like to do when I have students together in a class or we're in a workshop setting and we're able to engage with this conversation, you could do like a four corners. You could do something where you're putting people in a line and you're having them kind of do that. I agree, disagree, fold them together, thinking about that. This level of comfort and discomfort. So I'll often start and say, well, with print reading, what do we know? What do we know and understand about print? And sometimes that's really simple. Like students, I don't try to be mundane about it. I'm like, no, really, this is a technology, right? We read left to right in English, we read top to bottom, we can look at all the textual features like tables of contents, graphics, things like that. And regardless of whether we're reading fiction or nonfiction or poetry or drama, there are certain conventions that we might follow. You could even get in a little bit deeper and thinking about what authors do. I'm thinking about like Beers and Propes, like the notice and note moves, or other text features and things, rhetorical devices and strategies that any author might use. But then where do we get a little bit of discomfort? Where do things sometimes happen differently? And these, again, questions I'm not asking just to be like, duh, obvious, but to say, what do we notice about print text versus digital text? Because there are different kinds of digital texts. And we could get into a little bit deeper conversation about multimodality, and we will a bit later on. But right now, I'm thinking generally words and sentences and paragraphs, and they may have hyperlinks and they may have images and things like that in between. So where do we get uncomfortable? What do we do? So like I'm seeing some notes in the chat here. I go down many rabbit holes with digital print, right? Yep, having multiple tabs open. I'm just used to reading that physical text and I enjoy that text. I can create a relationship with that text, but I have to by default do a lot of reading online, right? So now we have this comment, print reading is more readily accessible. They don't need to sign in or sign up. Yes, and then we're thinking about scaffolding and differentiation. Again, we'll come back to this conversation about AI and using that too. So there's all these things that we know and do and that we teach students. And I think it's worth unpacking that every once in a while because, again, even though it doesn't feel like a technology, words on paper are a technology and they afford certain things and they afford other things when we're in these digital spaces. Yeah, Zoe, I literally feel your pain after a day of staring at the computer screen. It can get a little taxing. All right, if we could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right. So one of the things that Kristen and I set out to do, and I'll share just a little bit about our research and some of our results, but then we're going to start thinking about some apps and some ideas that will bring us up to where we're at now. We started this probably back in 2010, 2011, 2013, somewhere around there. And we got out in schools and we were asking, what is it that we can do with our colleagues to reach and teach all readers in all formats? And we wanted to think about how we could use this framework that we were developing of connected reading to help students think about what they do at these different stages when they're encountering and engaging and so forth. And now I even think about it, and so much has changed. So, like for instance, now we can use these devices. We can hold it up to a book, and we used to, of course, be able to take a picture. We could import that somewhere and annotate on it, but now it'll scan the text for us. And when we think about ways that we've seen students engage with text in the past, I know book snaps were a huge thing for a while. They would take pictures and scribble and put emojis and things like that. But also, we can now ask them, go ahead and highlight that. Take that quote. Where are you saving that? Are you putting it in OneNote? Are you putting it in something like Notion? Are you putting it in Google's Notebook, LM, and having that save and create some kind of catalog of reading for yourself? How are you making sure that you're documenting and doing all this? And how can you move across formats? What happens when you're moving from space to space, from print to digital and back again? All right, if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so this was an image we found Creative Commons licensed, and we just really appreciated it at the time. And I think it's still relevant. The Kindle might be version 1.0, but I'm sure we can bear with that for just a moment. But just this idea about where and how and what we do when we're reading. And so we want to think about this, and we'll elaborate just briefly on this idea of reading instruction for all students. And we'll talk a little bit about these profiles that Kristen and I created. And maybe you can help me think, how might we update these profiles? How might we share these kinds of profiles with our students to get them talking about their own reading habits and to think about what it is they're doing or not doing or might want to start doing with their own reading. And just to think about then with this connected learning model, what was it that we were trying to do? What was it that we were aiming to do in order to get things going and to create this model that would be applicable for students in all spaces and to then help guide professional learning and professional development? So, all right, if we can go to the next slide, please. Now here, if you'd like, you can dig into a little bit more of the background on our research. And in fact, if you would, for a moment there, and the one that's right under the C also, and it's Turner Hicks 2015 with the hyperlink there, and that is a link to our article that came out in English Journal. And hopefully that won't mess up screen sharing, but if you can click into that one for just a moment, and I'll drop a direct link to it here in the chat. And if you scroll down just to that second page, one of the things that we were fortunate to do when we worked with NCTE is they created kind of this an image that showed these interactions. So up there in that upper right-hand corner, we were thinking about as we looked back through the surveys and talked to the students and did the interviews and things like that, what are the key aspects? What are the verbs? What are the things they're doing with text? And we boiled it down to this. They encounter text. They then go through the cyclical process of evaluating and engaging with text. So if you want to pull up that PDF and just have that open in another tab, kind of keep thinking about those three things: encountering, and then moving into this recursive process of engaging and evaluating, and then sending those texts along so other readers can encounter them as well. And when we think about how we interact with books, and we have a book that we want to share with a friend, here, this is a book that I've encountered, I've read it, I've engaged with it, I've evaluated it, I think it's of high quality. Here, I'm passing this on to you or giving it to you as a gift. So in some ways, everything old is new again, right? It's not like we're doing anything drastically different with the reading that we're doing in digital spaces. It's just that we are doing it with different formats and different ease of use and different abilities to share with our networks. Thanks for pulling that up for me. We can jump back over to the slide deck. The other two pieces that are listed there, and you can go and follow them later. One is just a reference for the full book for the connected reading, and then the Reading Research Quarterly article. If you really want to dig into the methods and all that, we were fortunate enough to have that piece published in Reading Research Quarterly, and it goes into a much deeper explanation of how we did the survey, how we did the interviews, and all those types of things. So that's available there as well. All right, so if you'll bear with me, just remember that some of this data is a little old. I did capture a screenshot from the recent Pew mobile device survey, so that'll be coming up soon. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so at the time Kristen and I did this survey, we had built it on the Pew Internet Research Center's Teen Parent Survey on writing, and just adapted the questions to think about how teens were working with reading. And ultimately, we were able to get 804 participants from a variety of different school settings where we had relationships with teachers and were able to visit the classroom and do some lessons ranging from one day to a couple of days, and then also interview their students and conduct the surveys while we were there. And so it was really quite powerful for us in the sense that we got to interact with the students and engage with them, and then also have these one-to-one conversations where we were really exploring what it meant for them to be readers in these spaces. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So remember on this next slide, the survey data on devices and access. This was from our comparison in 2013 to what was then Pew Research's 2013 survey on tablets and e-readers. And they had gotten about 802 teens, and so ours was pretty comparable. And this is that point of the presentation where I'm like to say, I am not a statistician, and we were fortunate enough to have some stats help to run and make sure it was reliable. And again, you can read about all that in our RRQ piece. But you can see that, we had a slightly lower daily internet use, but a little bit higher with smartphone or mobile phones and smartphones and things like that. But if you go to the next slide, it will actually kind of take us to this fast forward. Where are we at right now? So this was a screenshot just today from the 2024 data from Pew Internet Research Center saying who owns cell phones and smartphones. And you can see in that, age 18 to 29-year-olds, 97% of those surveyed own. Now, they didn't survey younger teens, but as anyone who's been part of this conversation over the past 5, 10, 15 years knows, smartphones are, I don't want to say quite ubiquitous, and there are certainly students who, because of issues with the anxiety or their own personal feelings about data and privacy protection, have pushed back against smartphones and said, no, not for me, I don't want that. But by and large, most students in that tween and teen age range are actually engaging with devices. So then it becomes the question, how are we going to actively teach them to be thoughtful, engaged readers with devices using those tools? We can go to the next slide, please. Again, this data is a little bit old because it was from the survey that Kristen and I did, but you can see that one of the key questions we asked them at the time was, how likely is it that you usually read on paper as compared to usually reading on a device? And then how often might you read both on paper and device and make strategic use of the paper and the device? Now, I'd really be curious to see what the numbers are right now. And you can see they don't all quite add up to 100%, but the idea was that most of them usually read on paper. That's where the lead took. But we also were seeing even then that when we compared in school and out of school, there were differences there. So in school, reading on paper, out of school, reading on a device. It was pretty stark at that time. I can only imagine how that data would change given the proliferation of open educational resources and additional online textbooks and subscription models for textbooks that has happened since then. And of course, it begs that question, like, Are they really reading? Are they skimming? Are they just trying to get the highlights? All those types of things. Again, if you want to just jot a note in the chat, the extent to which you've seen some of these things happen and change for you in the past 5, 7, 10 years in your classrooms. Where are students doing most of their reading? Are some of them preferring to read on devices, dedicated reading devices like Kindles? Are they reading on their smartphones? Are they even allowed? Perhaps you've been one of the schools this year that your state or district has instituted a smartphone ban. So anything that you'd like to say in the chat just about where and how you're noticing students read, feel free to go ahead and add that in there. The next slide too is an infographic that we created from the data we had at the time. What we were trying to show here is that out of all of the students, most of them were in some way, shape, or form accessing the internet on a daily basis. Now, again, they did not necessarily everyone have a phone in their pocket at the time, nor their own dedicated desktop or tablet or laptop at home, but by and large, most of them had access to the internet when they wanted it. Now, again, this raises questions about, yep, I'm seeing it in the chat here. There are a lot of skimming. Students are still checking out hard copies. That's great. And they're doing that for their personal reading, okay? Doing things with Chromebooks. Ban has happened on cell phones. Yeah, so as we think about this, when we think about the device access, I'm still very mindful to note that while it's not 100% ubiquitous and there are always challenges with access, most students could access digital texts if they chose to. And so I think that's important for us to keep in mind as we're thinking strategically about how we're instructing our students to use these texts. All right, then we'll go to the next slide, share just a little bit more data. And then we'll talk a bit about some of the qualitative responses we got from students as well. So on the next slide, it just kind of quickly provides this overview going back to some of the early studies on digital reading. And I did want to grab a link and drop it in the chat here for you. One of the more recent and comprehensive looks at digital reading and trying to develop an overarching framework for it came from Julie Coiro just this last year, where she's been trying to think about her 20 plus years of, what it means to be a reader and how the process of reading is changing over time. But here we were just drawing from some of the early work on digital reading, and it helped us to start to think about, what is it that kids are actually encountering? Short form linear text, longer form text, things that they can read quickly, things that they would have to bookmark and come back to. Are they actually reading texts in full? Are they taking advantage at that time of some of those emerging accessibility features and thinking about how they could use the audio aspects of these e-reading devices and things like that? And so we think that it's pretty important to continue to have those conversations with students about what and how they're reading. And sorry, it took me so long to pull up that Julie Coiro citation, but I'll drop that in the chat. This is one of her recent pieces, and it certainly does talk more about how her conception of what digital reading has changed over the last 20 or so years. All right, so with that, we're going to look at a little bit of the data, some of the responses, and this is where if you still have that other tab pulled up and you're thinking about that graphic with the encountering and the evaluating and the engaging, and we're going to try to think about that now and what it means in this era. Where are we at with helping students engage with text in these ways? So on the next slide, we have just one example of encountering, and I'm sure you've all encountered this kind of encountering of text as well. So what does it mean when we are just surfing? We're just randomly trying to find something for fun. Back in the day, we would have to go to a web directory like Yahoo, or we'd ask Jeeves or something like that. Now, of course, with algorithmic personalization, you barely start typing in a keyword into a search engine and you get all kinds of responses. Depending on your settings, it might automatically populate and bring up new stories for you, things like that. And this really does kind of get to that point of like just kind of going down the rabbit hole. I'm just going to see what's out there and find something. And even in this case, there was this teen happened to go to the websites for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or CNN. In the next example of encountering, we called this stumbling. And at the time, there was still a website called Stumble Upon. Maybe some of you remember using that website like we did, but it was really designed to find something and then again, using the algorithms, have it kind of search and find something that you might want to stumble on next. Like, where can you find something new? Where can you find something to go from there? And so it was this idea of stumbling. And in contrast to what we would have called surfing, which is just kind of really, yeah, I don't really have a purpose. I'm just kind of clicking, we'll see what's going on. Stumbling is that slightly more intentional stance that you take. Like, oh, there's something that's there. I want to find it and go a little bit further. I want to go a little bit more into this. Now, of course, in the last few years, we have this concept of lateral reading where we might click and hold and open another tab to try to find out more information. That comes from Sam Weinberg and their digital inquiry group. And we also just know we have so many options with social media. Remember, this initial data was captured back in about 2013, 2014. So it may not have been quite as popular, and the apps on the smartphones weren't quite as useful in doing that. Then, as we move forward, so we think about how they encounter the text. So think about that image in the graphic. Somehow you have encountered a text. It came to you, or you did a little bit of searching. Then, what do we actually get to do? Well, of course, we're going to read. And we've already talked, and there's been perhaps a little lamenting, and I feel it too, both as a parent and as an educator, and as a reader myself who still struggles to not skim, but to really pay purposeful, focused attention. We know that there are all these kinds of opportunities to read out there. And so this was something that one of the students said. Isn't it great? I can click on a word, I can search for it, I can look for it in the dictionary, and that kind of accessibility is built into nearly all of our devices now. And then this other student said, the Kindle takes it further, really enjoying the fact that they could see something that was highlighted and noted by other Kindle users. And so we've probably seen this more and more now too. There are annotation tools on the web that you can build right into your web browser, like Hypothesis. There are also tools that you can use for annotation by uploading PDFs or open ebooks like Perusal. And of course, some of you probably have through your district, you have things like Cami or some other kind of annotation. You can even annotate just Google, PDFs in Google Drive at this point. So this idea that we're now kind of moving into different tools that let students have those engaged annotation experiences is really important and something to think about as we're teaching them. On the next slide, then, we talk a little bit more just about this idea of sharing. So this particular student was, talking about Goodreads and Facebook and if someone is in my same fandom, how do I share this great thing with them? Of course, there's other spaces like Reddit and any of the other social media apps that have emerged. And there's that phenomenon of book talk. And we said, like with Snapchat, the book snaps and things like that. So where and how are we seeing these? And if some of you have ideas that you want to put in the chat, like where you get your ideas for reading and where you share your reading, certainly feel free to add that in the chat right now. I think sometimes we all learn about something new, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize there was this Facebook group or there was this channel or this content creator on TikTok that was sharing great stuff. But even at that time, 10 years ago or so, students were already starting to think about how they could share their reading experiences. On the next slide, we start to get to this idea about evaluation. And in this sense, we're thinking, yes, about critical evaluation of websites and engaging students in that process of understanding who created this, why they created it, kind of those media literacy types of questions, but also thinking about their own personal purpose. Like if there's one thing that we probably can all agree on as reading teachers, we want students even with assignments, to hopefully set a personal purpose, not just for school, not just to get the grade, but what is it that we're asking them to do as readers? What are you hoping to gain from this process? How might you gain something from this? And so giving them that option and using the digital tools to enhance that and to think about that, and maybe even talk with some of their other classmates and friends about those purposes. And then the last piece here on the next slide, thinking about the context, and this has become incredibly important as we look across sources and we're teaching them again these concepts of lateral reading and media evaluation. Where did you get this from? Where did it come from? Did you search it out? Was it something that you looked for while you were signed in? Did you use an incognito window? Or even better, did you go to like DuckDuckGo to search for it? So you're not still having some of that residual of your search history from other search engines. Are you actually talking to people, asking a librarian, asking a trusted friend? Where is the context in which you saw these stories? And as we know, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but anything that we can do to help them understand, especially current political information and making sure they're not encountering outright fake news and misinformation will be incredibly important. But you can see from this student, said, I was using Tumblr to help me out and to find something new. Hopefully we'll look here in a minute at least a tool for academic reading, and we'll also look at a tool to just search the general web to search for resources using AI as well. The next slide just has a book cover from Clive Thompson. At the time, he wrote the book Smarter Than You Think, and thinking about how to maintain mindfulness while also trying to, be in this digital space. So, how are we teaching students to be metacognitive? How are we teaching them ways to, as simple again as it sounds, turn off your notifications right now. Put it in do not disturb mode. Make sure that you are attending to the task, turning on an ad blocker so you're not getting all the distracting pop-up ads, or making sure that while you are reading, instead of clicking and opening up all these other tabs, try to give it a full read first and then go back and engage with it as a hypertext and try to do it that way. So just some interesting thoughts. He was also the one that was telling that we had mentioned in the slide earlier. What is the nature of the text itself? Is it a short text? Is it a mid-form text, or is it a longer text that's going to require deeper and more devoted attention? All right, so we're seeing some great things in the chat about book ideas and things like that. Yeah, Jennifer, of course, we get them from webinars and conferences and things like that, and from other authors. So certainly by the end, we should maybe share some of the things we're reading. So then we just describe, I kind of already talked about that next slide. So again, Thompson, just short form, mid form, long form. Then we started thinking about what is it that we're seeing and experiencing, and how might we ask students to really document their interactions with texts that are born digital. And now by that, I mean, not just something that's digitally convenient. We are all familiar with the newspaper article, CNN, New York Times, or a blog post or something like that, which because of its very nature has been printed online and posted online and will have hyperlinks and things like that. But here, we also were at that time where a new kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, genre or style of text was coming out, and that is snowfall. Oh, yep, Jen's already got it. Thank you. You beat me to it. Awesome. So grabbing that link, take a moment. Feel free, open up another tab. If you have not experienced snowfall, and I'm thinking this was 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. I'd have to double check and get the exact publication date, but it's well over 10 years old now. And when we think about 2012, thank you. When we think about what was happening then, this really was quite revolutionary. And now, of course, and you have the links on the very next slide, there are whole sections of like the New York Times multimedia page, the Washington Post, other publications have these born digital multimedia pieces. But at the time when Snowfall came out, the fact that we had this responsive scrolling, that you actually had to listen to the audio clips, watch the video clips, engage in the photo carousels, interact with the map, that was pretty revolutionary when they designed that for the iPad and it came out, and you actually had, in order to generate meaning and to engage fully in the text, do all of those things. They weren't just superfluous add-ons. They were something that were essential to meaning making. And what's great now, 10, 12, 15 years later, is that even with basic website creation tools like Weebly, Wix, Google Sites, things like that, we can invite our students to do these things and embed these kinds of interactive elements. So feel free, if you'd like, again, click on those links to the New York Times multimedia. I tend to default to that because through our university, we get regular subscription to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. So those are the places I go often, and that's why I grabbed that screenshot for there. Hopefully you're able to access those or through your regional or local newspaper. So then we start to think, what else do we see? What are the other kinds of texts that are out there and the places that students might go and interact with them? So the Electronic Literature Organization, again, it's been around for quite some time. They were born with this idea that we are going to create sophisticated, thoughtful, meaningful pieces of literature that are meant to be encountered digitally. So again, not to dissuade or take away from the joy of reading a print book, but these are texts that were created as multimedia texts meant to be interacted with. So you can delve into there and take a look at the different collections. Like if you were to click under the project tab, you'll see volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for instance, I'll just grab the link to number 4 and drop it in the chat so people can click to that right away. But you click there and then you can jump right in and you can look at any one of those texts. And then you can say, all right, let's kind of look at this. Let's interact with it. They'll have like author statements, and then you can click in and access the work. So when we're asking our students to think about what they need to know and be able to do as readers in print, how might we also ask them to think about what they know and need to be able to do with these types of born digital texts? And so the Electronic Literature Organization is a great place to start. You can also do searches for e-literature or e-poetry, multimodal poetry, things like that. And again, what's really great is that we have so many web-based tools, Adobe Express, Canva, different things like that, that students can quite honestly make their own e-literature type texts now and engage with them that way. We'll go to the next slide. I talked a little bit a moment ago about lateral reading, and the group was founded originally as the Stanford History Education Group, SHEG, sorry, but they are now the Digital Inquiry Group. And they did a lot of research thinking about how experts read versus how novices read. And I'll put a link to their collection of the online reasoning curriculum here. But it was just this notion that experts will tend to start in one place and open up multiple tabs to fact check, to look for more context, to find out more information. We know there are other models. Back in the day, there was the CRAP test looking for like context and relevancy and accuracy and things like that. Mike Caulfield has the SIF test. But the reason I mention this now, and I think about this in the concept of teaching students to read, I've included a screenshot of All Sides, but there are other resources that you could send students to as well. I know Gale has a database that many schools and state libraries have access to for opposing viewpoints and context. EBSCO has their point of view reference center. Just this idea that we're trying to teach students that we're looking for context. And this gets the AI piece too, right? Like, how can we have them take a text and they're like, here's one version, here's one take on this topic, here's another take on this topic. Help me compare and contrast. What are some things I should be mindful of as I'm reading this? Is there an ideologically or politically infused perspective? Are there keywords or phrases that I might need to look out for? How can I have my students use AI in that way to more fully and thoughtfully engage with these texts? So again, lateral reading as a strategy can be useful. All right, now if we'll go to that next slide, I think I'll let you, we'll keep the screen sharing this way for now. I'll put a link into the chat here in just a moment. So the screenshot there is one of the tools called Research Rabbit. And while I'm not sure that I would necessarily give this to, say, my middle schoolers, I could certainly start to see thinking about using this with my high schoolers. perhaps helping them understand that there's academic research and other places that they can go and they can find information from. And what you see in that screenshot is that it's like a reference list, but turned into a social network map. So you click on one article, it will find all the references for that article, all the authors, and then you can click into that network map and you can read and find out a little bit more. And I think that's just incredibly powerful to start to see how ideas are built off of one another and to teach students that you want to find rabbit holes. Wow, you can find a rabbit hole of this one topic or this one author and trace their work in these ways. So again, maybe a little bit more than what I do with a middle school student, but especially for our advanced high school students and certainly our college students, I think it's incredibly useful. The hyperlink that's in there, and I'm going to just drop it in the chat so everybody can take a look at it and open it up in their own tab, is to Perplexity. You may have heard about Perplexity. They're just like OpenAI. They're encountering some challenges with copyright and intellectual property and all the things. And I know our webinar tonight is not explicitly about AI, but beware. I know I'm mindful that there are intellectual property issues. But what you'll notice with this idea that you go to Perplexity, and when you click there and you go into the web search for the AI, it actually gives you the option to say, choose the focus. Do you want to search the whole World Wide Web in general? Or do you want to do a more academic search? Do you want to search across social media? If we're going to even expand our idea of reading to transcripts of videos, it will allow you to search across video transcripts. And so again, thinking about how to help students search for resources and to find those additional places to go and find more information and continue reading from there. Then the last piece, and you can see my sample prompt there below, and hopefully you can copy and paste that. And I'll throw it here into the chat just so you can take a look at it. One of the things I'm finding with students and teaching them prompt engineering is I want them to be thinking like experts. What is it that I want them to know about my reading and my writing and my way of understanding text that they can then use AI to become better and use it as a thinking partner and as a scaffold to become better as writers and readers. So with this prompt, what I'm trying to get at is this idea that, I'm reading this article about such and such, and I want to understand something, but I want you to interact. Don't just give me the answer. Don't just tell me about the article, but actually interact with me and help me think about what the article is doing. So you can see, I'm hoping this link will work. I created this link with ChatGPT and hopefully you can click in and take a look, but you can see how I framed it. I had taken an article from a UN report on climate change. And then I said, I used that template there and said, I'm reading this article about climate change. I'm new to the topic and I want to understand why it's important. I was very generic there. I felt like, I just wanted to get a simple one in there, but you could change the verb. I want to understand. I want to learn more about. We could get our good Bloom's taxonomy verbs out. I want to critique. I want to analyze. You could change that around. And then ask me questions and move me from basic recall all the way up into these more sophisticated questions. So that's kind of what, ChatGPT did. What's interesting and what I found compelling, I did the same type of thing with Claude, and I'll just paste what Claude gave me as its interaction here. It said, okay, well, I'll help you understand this topic. Let's start with some basic comprehensions. So first, what's the basic definition? And it's asking me to enter that into the chat. So it's really engaging in the chat. Whereas the output for ChatGPT, it's like, well, here are these three questions. And it doesn't really even, ask me to answer it. So the output is going to depend on these different AI models that you might use and how you might interact with them. So having said all that and shared all that, and we're going to leave a little time for Q&A here. And again, Deborah, I'm so sorry I cut into your introduction. I know you need some time at the end too. On the final slide, I just want to post some questions that we could start thinking about. So what does all of this mean for our emergent readers, for our developing readers, for our adolescent readers, for adult readers, those that are perhaps multilingual learners and starting to read in a different language, for us as educators, for us as readers ourselves, and thinking about what it is that we want to take away and to enhance our own reading lives. So, yeah, if there are other questions that have come up in the chat, I'll be curious to see what I might have missed. So, hopefully, Deborah and our other panelists can point out any questions I've overlooked. And I know we have here just a few minutes to interact with some Q&A.
Hey, if you have questions, please go ahead and post those in the chat and we will share those. We have lots of comments.
Yeah, so I'm going back to Zoe's comment here in the chat. I've asked all my students to give me book suggestions, and I've been reading those books during independent reading time. They love being able to ask me if I'm at a particular part yet and if I liked a specific character. I think that's great too. Thanks, Zoe. All right, so question, how do you build students' lateral reading skills? That's a term I wasn't familiar with. So thanks, Tracy. So one of the things that I do, I try to model that process. And in fact, Deborah, I don't know, there might be a webinar recording of us doing that from earlier. I don't know if participants tonight have access to that earlier webinar. But one of the things I'll do, Tracy, is really model and walk students through tell me a little bit about your topic, think about it. What are you kind of getting a sense of? And I usually do this with my first year students in the context of a more political topic, something that's going to have a clear kind of perspective from a more conservative and liberal perspective, because I then introduce all sides and Gale and all those other sources. But basically what I do is say, let's just read these. And what do you see? What do you notice in these two articles? Are they talking about the same thing in general? How are they talking about it? What's the tone? What's in one article but maybe missing from the other, and vice versa? Do we see different words or phrases that might be used? All Sides also has something called the Red-Blue Dictionary. So we might look up their topic and see if there's more information we can find out about it. So those are some initial ways that I would get started on that. And then as they're doing their ongoing inquiry, just encouraging them to go back to that initial process and see, what do you notice? Who's using these terms? How are they using these terms? What's getting left out? What counts as evidence? Are they just using anecdotal evidence or single quotes from people, or are they showing statistical evidence? Things like that. All right, there's another question.
Yes, Tiffany asks, what is your take on instruction using audiobooks? Is this reading?
Yeah, I love that question. I've been asked that question before, and I would say yes, of course it's reading. Anything that we can do to get students to slow down and engage and really be immersed, especially for those audiobooks that do have those wonderful narrators that are going to be able to do that. And what I'm finding more and more, and actually a student this semester asked me, because I was having them listen to a podcast, and her first question was, is there a transcript? So like, as a matter of fact, there is. And that's why I had picked that one, because I knew it was going to be accessible. So I think anything we can do to have students read across modalities is important. And then, yeah, having them talk. What were you seeing and experiencing as you were just reading the words on the page? And then how did that narrator bring that scene to life? What was that like for you? How might they have done that differently? Was it effective? I think those conversations can be really wonderful to have, Tiffany. And then Chris said, I've seen research that reading online is about 25% slower than reading from a hard copy. Oh, that's a great question. I will be honest, I have not read the empirical research lately. What I do know and remember is that, there was the reading, and it was kind of, you read in a zigzag pattern, obviously, as you're going left to right and down from top to bottom. But they were noticing more of an F pattern where readers were kind of trailing off and not always reading everything. And I think that's really important to note as students are reading. And I'm sure I probably still do that too when I'm reading online if I was actually using an eye tracker. But it gets to me back to some of that point about the annotation, like when do we want to slow down and have people annotate and to have them put in those comments. I think, I wonder, I connect, extend, and challenge, things like that. Yeah, and reminding that talk. And what's great, Jerry, too, is one last thing with the AI, using the voice assisted AI, upload the article. Hey, ask me some questions about this article, and then they can interact with it that way. I know you've got some other slides to share, and again, I apologize for cutting you off earlier, Deborah.
Oh,
So
no, no, no,
pause,
no, 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 no.
and
It
I'll
is
answer questions in the chat while you're going over these final logistics.
okay. It has been a pleasure having you. And in case you missed the webinar from last year that Troy did, you can go to the ERWC online community and access the webinar section. And there is a recording there. I have to tell you, it was truly thought-provoking. And so I do encourage you to go and check out that resource. Uh, Jennifer or Cindy, would you like to go over the ERWC information?
So Deborah, this is Kia. I had them just playing in the background as people were um as the presentation was concluding and then people were exiting. So just I just had it playing in the
Okay,
background. Yeah.
okay. Thank
These are
you.
just like FYI, like informational slides.
Well, thank you so much for that, Troy. That was an amazing presentation. Much appreciated.
And as you are exiting the webinar, please be aware of November 14th. We will have Sarah Zerwin as our presenter, and she will be covering strategies for student-driven learning with secondary readers and writers.